day 2 of COSM, and we start on a high point. You all know Andy Kessler of the Wall Street Journal, a humble scrivener, weekly columns that we all read and always surprise and fascinate us. But Andy began at Bell Labs doing chip design and computer-aided design for chips, and moved on from Bell Labs to an investment career that climaxed with Velocity Capital, which rode the entire technology surge through the 1990s. And as Andy told me, that when the Saudi limousines began to gather outside his office, bringing bags of money to pour into tech stocks in 1999, he decided that was a sell signal, and he closed the fund. So his timing has been terrific. Then he decided to become a writer, and he wrote novels and running my wonderful book about investment, and then became the Wall Street Journal's most influential columnist. So Andy Kessler.
All right, good morning. You guys hear me? Good morning. By now, we should be caffeined up and baconed up. So let's get the day going. So first of all, I've been to not every, but almost every COSM, whether it was a micro or a tele or every COSM, almost every COSM. And mostly what I took away from it was how to talk by waving my arms like George Gilder is a great role model. I also, in grad school, used Carver Mead's book, Introduction to VLSI Systems. And so there's a very long history with everyone here. So I want to start, the idea is to talk about the business model of AI. Now, it's really hard to do since at least generative AI has been out in the wild for a whopping 11 months, right? It was November 30th where it was released, again, out to the public. So I want to do it by analogies. And we could talk about shoulders of giants, but if you ever met Sam Altman, he's about this high, and as are many techies. So instead, I want to talk about a different sort of analogy. And it's if anyone has been to Victoria Falls in between Zambia and Zimbabwe, on the Zambezi River, locally they call it, I had to write it down, Mosi Oatunya, which means the thundering smoke, which kind of sounds like what we're heading into, the world of thundering smoke. Anyway, there's this very cool bridge that crosses this huge ravine, or these huge cliffs on each side, and this bridge that goes across, where of course they have bungee jumping, and it's like a playland for everyone. But I read the story of how they built that bridge, and it was fascinating, right? It started with literally a bow and arrow. Like someone shot a bow and arrow across this chasm with a string attached to it. And then the string pulled a cord, and the cord pulled a rope, and the rope pulled a cable, and cable was more cable until they could put steel and eventually asphalt. And to me, that's much more a better analogy of where we are today. We go back to the 1948 and the invention of the transistor, and the transistor led to integrated circuits, 8 of them on a chip, they called it, in 1958. 1970 came the microprocessor, which I think it had 1,000 or a few thousand of these transistors, and somewhere in the middle of that was modems and software, broadband, fiber, cloud, SaaS, and now AI and generative AI. Each one of those had a unique business model. And so you can't just say, oh, well, we're going to do just what the chip guys did or just what the SaaS guys did. It just doesn't work. Each time as you build on that bridge, the business model changes. It went from, sales per transistor, per chip, per line, per seat, and on and on. And so let's go back slightly and see if we can figure this out together. So the original PC came out. Everyone said, wow, this is going to be great for two things and two things only: recipes and checkbooks. I mean, that was what the original homebrew PCs were for. And then VisiCalc came along and allowed for spreadsheets. And it rippled through Wall Street, because literally when I showed up on Wall Street in the 80s, there were people with X-Acto knives and Mylar paper, and spreadsheets did away with. So now we could all spread sheets instead of on tables on our personal computer screens. And it was a productivity enhancement. You could do more with less. You didn't need armies of people, and I didn't like the people with the X-Acto knives. I was always scared of them. Microsoft bundled, there was Lotus 1-2-3, and Microsoft bundled word processing and spreadsheets, and they charged $450. And they charged $450 for the longest time. In fact, Microsoft today, I think, would still want to charge $450 for Office if they can get away with it. But others came around for $99, and of course that high price point meant there was a huge pirate market for Office and for all these spreadsheets for people using them at home. Now it's monthly fees and annual fees. But we got these brand new businesses that never existed before. Desktop publishing. Before, to do a magazine, you needed more people with X-Acto knives, and now anyone could do a magazine. And same thing on Wall Street. Spreadsheets proliferated. So from there, we got client-server computing, all sorts of things, but we ended up with social networks. And social networks should thank Bob Metcalfe, who's here, who came up with the idea of the value of a network is based on the square of the number of users. So if you have one user, it's actually n times n minus 1. One user, it's not worth anything. Two, it's worth something. 100, it's worth the square, and million, now a billion, which is why Mark Zuckerberg should wake up every morning and bow towards Bob Metcalfe. But what was the business model? The business model was selling ads. Google, selling ads. A lot of Silicon Valley turned into these bag-carrying salesmen. Of course, it was online, and it was much more efficient, and it allowed for commerce to take place. But what I was fascinated by is, if you really dig into it, the price of those ads, Google was the smartest one at first to create an auction for the ad price. And what it turned out to be, if you were selling a big screen TV, which I buy all my big screen TVs off of the web, is the ad price was somewhere between 20 and 50% of the margin of selling that TV. Not Sony making the TV, but the person who bought it wholesale and sold it retail. Google would take somewhere between 20 and 50%. And you go, well, now that's a business, right? That's a fascinating business. YouTube came along, and it was more like a traditional television ad business. AWS came along, and they sold compute power per instruction. With Alexa, who knows what the model is. But what I think what we'll end up with is a business model similar to that ad business. But instead of the margin, it'll be the margin of savings. So productivity is a key point, like I said, getting rid of people with X-Acto knives. And you all can come up with great examples of how technology has created productivity and driven the engine of commerce in the U.S. So I think the business model will end up being is AI companies will extract 20 to 50% of the productivity savings of corporate America. And I bet you if you went back into the SaaS model, it's probably not that far off. And but then the question is how do you do that? Here's a image that I found. This is my only slide, so don't freak out that I have 147 of these. This is just today. 11 months later, there's 10 different types of generative AI models, from text to text like ChatGPT, all the way to image to science and image to 3D. I mean, it's the most fascinating thing of what generative AI can do in the various models. But how do you charge? I mean, maybe with text you can charge ads or you can charge per month, but how do you do that for images? How do you do that for video? Audio to text. I mean, all these things, it is really difficult 11 months on to figure out what a real business model for this market can be. But as I said, if you focus on the productivity of each one of these, and I'm going to give an example in a second, I think you're going to go a long way to figuring out what kind of business is going to develop over the next couple of decades, and that we're all going to be talking about for a long time. So on the cost side, you've looked at that long enough, haven't you? Okay. On the cost side, it's rather interesting because we have these trillion or billion and then trillion parameter large language models that companies are offering, and I use it for free. I don't pay, so I use ChatGPT 3 or 3.5. But the business model so far for OpenAI and or Microsoft, and Microsoft is rolling out all these co-pilots. Everything's going to have a co-pilot. But the first one was this GitHub co-pilot for programmers, and they charge $10 a month. The Wall Street Journal did some work and figured that Microsoft is losing $20 per user offering this service for $10 a month. Now, that's not going to happen for the longest of time. But if they raise the price to $30 a month, will as many people use it? Who knows? Some power users, Microsoft may be losing $80 a month. So the infrastructure is very, very expensive so far today, and that's going to jangle the business model that people use at least early on. But right now it's almost free, like Google search is free to get people hooked on using it. And a lot of programmers, it does an okay job. Some swear by it as a programming assistant or a programming co-pilot, let's call it. Facebook put out one of their versions of a large language model called Llama. Everything has to have an LLM in it. Llama, Balama, Hama, I don't know. It has been, someone put it on a MacBook, right? And so you go, okay, well, this is kind of interesting. All of a sudden, again, 11 months into it, we have at least some versions of these models running on personal computers, and therefore they can run on phones, and maybe they can even run on watches as time goes on. So let me give you just one example of what a potential business and or business model can be. There is a pretty large business from companies like UiPath and others called robotic process automation. And they go into companies and they find out all of the repetitive human tasks. So even though it says robotic, it's not, Rosie the robot. It finds all the repetitive tasks inside of companies and tries to automate it. And the way and there's also business process automation. And the interface is similar. It's this wonderful, like a PowerPoint thing where you move icons and arrows between them. And from that, businesses can automate maybe call centers or writing checks and payroll and all sorts of things. And it's this big business. And I've talked to a few folks who are working on the agent part of GPT. And so they have names like Agent GPT and Auto GPT and the like. And in effect, those are the automated versions of that same robotic process automation. But instead of someone sitting there and figuring out what all of the lines to be drawn between icons, you basically ask your large language model to do it for you. And it's an iterative process. But these are the kinds of applications that you're going to see. And they're going to surprise the heck out of all of us. And we may not all hear about robotic process automation, GPT, or whatever it's going to end up being called, because it's going to be buried inside a corporation. But there's going to be a terrific use cases. And again, what they charge, if they're smart, hopefully is something like 20 to 50% of the productivity gains that are going to be made. So the last thing I'll say, and then I'll sit down and chat with George, is there's still a lot of confusion about what generative AI is going to do. It's either going to create massive wealth, or it's going to take all of our jobs, so we have to have universal basic income and sit at home and watch Netflix all day, or it's an existential threat and it's going to vaporize humanity. Now, I actually think maybe all three are going to happen, but that remains to be seen. The reality is, I don't think it's going to create an existential extinction threat. The trick is I think the only thing you can mandate, besides, the Biden administration put out an executive order on Monday, and in the UK they had a Bletchley agreement that came out yesterday. And I think all that is a bunch of nonsense, that all you really need to mandate is a kill switch. That somewhere inside the code there's a kill switch, especially when the generative AI interfaces with the real world, is, open the pod bay doors, Hal. Put it in, put the kill switch in. More importantly, Vinod Khosla, maybe a month ago, was asked, what the impact is going to be. This is venture capitalist Vinod Khosla, formerly of Kleiner Perkins, now of Khosla Ventures. And he said that what generative AI is going to be able to replace 80% of 80% of jobs. Now, you got to think about that a little bit, right? It doesn't mean it's going to replace 80% of jobs, but 80% of the tasks within jobs. And I think that's already happened, whether it was the plow or the phone or Slack channels. That's already has taken place. But what he and everyone else neglects to mention is the 80% of new jobs that are going to be created. As the woman from Amazon said yesterday, hey, should you be worried about, firing all these programmers? And her answer was, you might want to think about tripling or quadrupling your sales, because that's the opportunity that's ahead. Thank you.
So we'll have questions from the audience, but I'll start, Andy, with all the lawyers are mobilizing. This is a maze of copyrights and infringement of intellectual property. It's a morass of courtroom maneuvers. How are we going to negotiate our way through this perplex?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let's go back to 1998 or 9, and there was a company called mp3.com, if you remember it. And they said...
No, what was that?
mp3.com. And they said, listen, we're just going to take
What is mp3.com?
MP3 would take songs in MP3 format
right,
and put them up on a website and say, use it all you want. And here's the $10 a month. Well, I forget what the business model was. And they were warned, say, listen, you can do that, but it's copyright infringement, and it's a $10,000 fine for each infringement. And they said, we're going to do it anyway, because that's how Silicon Valley works. You just, move fast and break things and ship it and see what happens. And, of course, what happened was they were sued for billions of dollars, and the company disappeared, but not after going public for a multi-billion-dollar value. And I think we're in the same situation today, where the training models for these large language models are quite fascinating. And those that have dug in found, at least for part of the training, they whipped through Reddit and Wikipedia and other sort of public, although Reddit says they're not public, and Twitter, until Twitter cut them off, as part of the parameters that they eat to come out with generative AI. And it turns out there were two repositories of digitized books, Book 1 and Book 2, which is like Thing 1 and Thing 2 and the Cat in the Hat. And none other than Sarah Silverman, the comedian, and the rather foul comedian, if you ask me, sued, saying that her book was in that. And other authors have done it, and I have done it myself too, where you ask it for a summary of their book, and it does this terrific job of providing a little too good of a summary. So the question then becomes, is that copyright infringement, or is it a derivative work, which, if it's derivative, you can't do it. If it's something brand new, you can. And the courts are going to figure this out.
How long is the summary it gives you? I mean, it's like a review. How does it differ from a review?
Well, because someone bought the book or was given the book and reviewed it. But the point is that these large language models read a copyrighted thing and spit it back out in some form. So the question is that fair use, or is that derivative? Lawyers.
It strikes me as fair use. I mean, unless they reproduce the whole book, if they do a summary of the book, that's routine throughout.
We'll see.
That's what you want. Yeah. How are people gonna find your book or sell it if people aren't allowed to?
You're right,
sum
and it
up
depends. It depends how long. But I wouldn't mind saying, give me the high points of life after capitalism. And then I don't have to buy it. It gets a little annoying when you write books. So this is one of, I found 3 different things that are a threat to generative AI. A legal threat. That's one. Now, can you then reverse using book 1 and book 2? Maybe. And if you ask OpenAI, they said, well, that's okay because we found plenty of other sources that we can substitute for those. But nonetheless, built into those models are potential copyright infringements. The other one is Section 230. If you remember, Section 230, it came along so that if you hosted information, you weren't held liable for what that information was. And so without it, Twitter wouldn't exist. Twitter would be sued out of existence by now, and Facebook as well. So Section 230, if you host it, you're not a publisher. The person that put it up is a publisher. But with ChatGPT, they don't host. They publish. You just said, they take it and they change it and they publish it. And so there are things that they're potentially liable for. And so let me see if I could find my notes. There was a great example. Here it is. A radio host, Mark Walters, asked ChatGPT, or someone asked ChatGPT about himself, and he said he was accused of embezzling from a nonprofit, which was a complete hallucination. I mean, they just made it up. Now, why they made that up, it's still unclear. But nonetheless, he's one of those, where do I go to get my reputation back? And the answer is the 3rd District Court down the block. So there's been other examples. Programmers, apparently ChatGPT, to learn how to program, rip through GitHub and other open source libraries. And so there is a programmer who also turns out to be a lawyer, surprise, surprise, Matthew Butterick, and he filed a class action suit against Microsoft and OpenAI on behalf of open source programmers. So in other words, it's like the movie Zelig, right? You come out with this great, remember Zelig, he came out with the eyeglasses, the pinch, and he went from nothing to famous and then got sued out of existence, so rags to riches to rags. I don't think that's going to happen. I think this is here to stay. But there are legal issues that still need to be figured out.
Yeah, they do have to be figured out, but really, this is the usual course of new technology. It devastates, it disrupts and transforms previous usage and IP, and it moves on to other new jobs and new opportunities and new inventions. And I think this is a reactionary view, which of course the law may foster, where you kind of assume that some existing distribution of information is canonical, and you don't allow any heresies. Right. But I think this is going to generate, what's going to happen is there are going to be millions of sources of AI. It's not going to be in big old kludge data centers. It's going to spread through the world, and this model will be a different regime and different legal approaches to it. But if we try to crystallize it now legally, it's going to stifle the future. The AI will move to China or whatever.
Agreed. But it may be
where it already is.
It may be a massive transfer of wealth from venture capitalists to lawyers in the meantime. And so, good luck getting this passed, but a Section 230.ai needs to be written to provide a legal safe harbor for these models.
Why can't we just apply 230 to AI?
Well, because it specifically said, because it was written for CompuServe.
I see. All right.
Literally, it was written for CompuServe.
We have just 2 or 3 minutes, so some parting thoughts, perhaps.
Well, any questions or? It was pretty definitive a presentation. I have to give.
All right, George.
Do you want to sum up, Andy?
What was the question?
There was a question here.
Oh, I can't see.
What was the third threat?
Oh, well, it was copyright, and it was Section 230, and it was the harassment.
Oh, harassment.
Where if it says it accused the guy of embezzlement, well, he has every right to sue someone. I don't know who you sue, but he has the ability to say, no, I wasn't, because this is out on the World Wide Web, and.
What does Wikipedia do now for errors or as?
Well, they have humans. They have human moderators, and even still, that can potentially fall under Section 230. They're hosting outside people changing things. So it's going to be interesting. However, I agree with you. In the long run, it's the greatest opportunity ever. There's the ability to remove a whole layer of costs for corporations and provide a productivity boost. But everyone always says, well, where's the productivity? It's the productivity paradox, and I think the same thing is going to happen here. It comes in small doses. Is that those on the leading edge will be the first one to apply the productivity solutions, and then it ends up eventually. It's like look at retail automation. There's a company called Toast that is now, anytime you go and you swipe a card, it's now a Toast thing. Well, where was those 20 years ago? You could have done it. Well, productivity as a slow march through the corporate.
Well, Andy, you once summed up that there are painkillers, vitamins, and psychedelics.
Yes.
And I think we're in the psychedelic phase of artificial intelligence, that in fact we're vastly exaggerating how it differs from all previous technological advances. And I think the big breakthrough of this era, as we look back, will not be AI, but graphene. And
maybe it's graphene.ai.
Yeah,
That's a great summary. And Andy, I appreciate you being here. I think it's your second time at our reprise of COSM, and you're welcome anytime. And let's do an hour next time. Really appreciate it. Let's hear that.
Thank you, Andy.